My passage comes from the greatest sermon ever preached, which is the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus ends this sermon with the parable of the wise and the foolish builders. In Matthew 7:24 through 27, Jesus said, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it." In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches us how to live a wise life and how to build on a solid foundation. And here's a part of what he said. In Matthew 5:44, Jesus commands us to love people and to pray for them. This seems really easy to do. It is not surprising that he tells us to love people and to pray for them. We might feel like we know that God expects us to do these things already. For example, I love my mom, my dad, my grandparents, friends, and maybe my sisters every once in a while. And I pray for the sick, the poor, those who have lost loved ones, leaders in the church, and maybe even some of the loved ones I just listed. It is easy to love these people and to pray for them because they do a lot for me. Loving people who love you is natural. Most of us would love people like this even if God didn't command us to. Now let's read the rest of Matthew 5:44. "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Jesus wants us to love and pray for our enemies and persecutors. When you think about what Jesus said, it is surprising and difficult to hear, and might even feel impossible to do. When you read that verse, does anyone come to mind? Let me give you an example from my life. So, I go to Oklahoma Christian Academy, OCA, and they run an after-school program, which is basically a daycare, and last year I worked there. And there's this one particular kid that was always causing trouble, getting himself into trouble, and getting others into trouble. And one day after work, I was looking through my bag and I couldn't find my wallet. So I looked all through my bag, all over the playground, and everywhere I had been that day, but I couldn't find it. So eventually, I called my mom, I talked to the front desk, and we found out that this kid had stolen it. And he had spent some money buying stuff from the vending machine for him and other people. But the worst part was that my driver's permit was in there, and that week I was supposed to take my driver's test, so I was pretty nervous that I'd have to wait longer to get my license. So in Matthew 5:43, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' That seems more appealing to most of us. It might feel more natural to love our neighbor and to hate our enemy, but Jesus has commanded us to do something much harder. So why does God command us to love and pray for our enemies and persecutors? Why should I love and pray for someone who stole from me? We find the answer to that question in Matthew 5:45. Jesus said, "So that you may be sons of your Father who's in heaven, for he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust." So Jesus wants us to love our enemies and pray for our persecutors, because that is how we become more like God. God doesn't just make the sun rise on the good, he makes it rise on the evil too. And he doesn't just send rain on the just, but he also sends rain on the unjust, because he loves everyone equally. So I would like to challenge you to pray for your persecutors, and maybe even pray for the strength to love your enemies, because the only way to be like God is to love others and to pray for them.